Okay, so imagine a message in a bottle.
Okay.
But instead of, washing up on a beach, it's from like the heart of the Cold War,
Oh, wow.
1988,
Okay.
and the sender, Kurt Vonnegut.
Wow.
A serious, sharp American author
Yeah.
writing to you in 2088.
Interesting.
And so we're diving into his letter today to kind of see how his hopes and fears line up against our present.
Yeah.
It's kind of a mind-bending history lesson.
It is fascinating, isn't it? That mix of satire and insight that Vonnegut was known for,
Right.
but applied to the future.
Exactly.
I mean, we're talking about the guy behind books like Slaughterhouse-Five,
Yeah.
dealing with war's absurdity,
Yeah.
and Cat's Cradle, where science goes hilariously wrong.
Right. And this letter was penned when Cold War tensions were high and environmental alarms were starting to ring.
Yeah,
It's like a snapshot of that anxiety.
it is.
But it's
Yeah.
more than just a time capsule.
Right.
Vonnegut kicks things off by giving 3 pieces of advice to future generations. And he leads with the serenity prayer,
Interesting.
which is all about, accepting what you can't change.
Yeah.
Having the guts to change what you can.
Right.
And the wisdom to know the difference.
You know what's fascinating here is the choice of the Serenity Prayer itself.
Yeah.
It's usually associated with recovery movements,
Yeah.
like Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah.
But Vonnegut applies it to the huge, messy problems humanity faced.
Right.
It's as if he's saying, look, the world's a tough place,
Yeah.
but here's a tool to navigate it.
Interesting.
But he goes on to mention Shakespeare,
Okay.
to thine own self be true,
Right.
and a line from St. John the Divine about judgment coming.
Ah.
It's a wild mix of personal,
Uh-huh.
spiritual, and practical advice all in one go.
Right. And that pragmatism really shines through when Vonnegut lays out his view of the 20th century.
It does.
He calls it a time of paralyzing news,
Wow.
where information overload about our own destructive actions was almost too much to handle.
Yeah, he doesn't sugarcoat it.
Right.
Population explosion,
Yeah.
trashing the environment,
Uh.
and nature's own unpredictable power,
Yeah.
all laid out there.
Right.
It makes you wonder, was he being a total downer?
Right.
Or was this a wake-up call?
Yeah.
Especially thinking about how some of those concerns like climate change
Right.
have become even bigger deals since then.
He really drives home this point about nature being this, uncaring force.
Yeah.
Almost like an antagonist. I mean, he talks about forest fires, lava flows, glaciers, carving up the land.
Yeah.
All as examples of how nature doesn't really play favorites.
Right?
He even says if people think nature is their friend, then they sure don't need an enemy.
It's a powerful way of framing it, right?
Yeah.
Not that nature is evil,
Right.
but that it operates on a scale and with a force we can barely comprehend.
Right.
And tied into that is his concern about overpopulation.
Right.
He uses this striking image of humanity
Mm.
as a new kind of glacier,
Wow.
consuming everything in its path.
Interesting.
Remember, this is 1988, long before things like carrying capacity were widely discussed.
Right.
It makes you appreciate how forward-thinking he was.
And then he throws this curveball.
What's that?
The idea that the Cold War's nuclear threat might have actually been a distraction?
Oh, wow.
Like maybe the fear of imminent annihilation made us ignore the slower but equally dangerous problems?
Right.
Like environmental collapse.
Think about living under that constant shadow of nuclear war.
Yeah.
Could it have made those long-term threats seem less urgent?
Right.
It's unsettling,
Yeah.
but it makes you wonder if we have similar blind spots today.
It does.
What pressing issues are we pushing aside because they feel too big,
Right.
too complex to tackle?
It's a heavy question for sure.
It is.
But then Vonnegut shifts gears
Okay.
and gives what he calls nature's stern but reasonable surrender terms.
Okay.
7 points he thinks are crucial for humanity's survival.
Interesting.
These aren't just random ideas either. They
Yeah.
hit on things like controlling population growth,
Okay.
stopping pollution,
Yeah.
shifting away from war,
Uh-huh.
and making education about living sustainably a top priority.
And what's really striking is how relevant these points remain even decades later.
Yeah.
He challenges us to think differently about science and technology,
Right.
arguing that throwing money at problems won't solve everything.
Right.
And he calls out the idea of escaping to another planet if we wreck this one as mean and stupid.
Oh.
Essentially, he's saying we have a responsibility to future generations,
Yeah.
not just to ourselves.
Right. And after laying all this out, he throws in this almost humorous image of the future.
Okay.
People hooked up to technology, never leaving their homes.
Oh, wow.
Drinking orange juice through straws like the astronaut.
Oh, wow.
It's like he's poking fun at the idea that technological progress equals true happiness.
It's that satirical edge he was known for.
Yeah.
But it also makes you think,
Right.
have we become so reliant on technology that we've lost sight of what truly matters?
Right.
What would Vonnegut make of our world today? Now, that's a deep dive for another time.
Yeah.
We'll be back in a bit to break down exactly how those surrender terms have played out in our present.
Okay.
So stick around.
Sounds good. So before the break, we were talking about Vonnegut's surrender terms for humanity.
Yeah, like he handed us a to-do list for surviving on this planet.
Yeah, exactly. But how have we actually done on those points?
Yeah, let's tackle them one by one.
Okay.
First up, produce and stabilize your population.
Right. Vonnegut was worried about us outgrowing the Earth's resources, and it's 2088 now. So
Right.
how'd that prediction play out?
Well, it's been a wild ride.
Okay.
Global population actually peaked back in the mid-21st century
Oh, wow.
and has been slowly going down since.
Interesting.
It was a mix of better family planning,
Okay.
education, and frankly, a few global crises
Oh, yeah.
that made us rethink that whole growth at all costs mindset.
So Vonnegut was onto something.
He was.
Even if it wasn't like a straight line to disaster.
Right.
But even with a smaller population, we're still dealing with the consequences of how we used or overused resources back then.
Exactly. It's like we dodged a bullet, but there's still shrapnel embedded.
Right.
Which brings us to point number 2. Stop poisoning the air, the water, and the topsoil.
Right.
This is where things get really interesting
Okay.
because we've seen some major tech leaps
Yeah.
in areas like renewable energy and cleaning up pollution.
Right. Solar, wind, geothermal, that's powering most of the world now.
Exactly.
And we've gotten a lot better at fixing up messed up ecosystems.
We have.
But have we really stopped poisoning the planet? Or just changed the type of poison?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
We've definitely moved away from the super toxic stuff.
Okay.
But the core problem, waste and consuming more than the planet can handle,
Right.
that's still a work in progress.
So we've kind of swapped one set of environmental headaches for another.
Yeah.
Maybe less apocalyptic,
Right.
but still headaches.
Still headaches.
Okay, so on to point 3. Stop preparing for war and start dealing with your real problems.
Right.
Kind of ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Considering we're in the middle of resource wars
Right.
sparked by climate change and water shortages.
It's almost like we followed Vonnegut's advice,
Yeah.
but not how he intended.
Right.
We're not focused on old school warfare,
Uh-huh.
but fighting for survival has taken on a new, more desperate form.
And that struggle is tied directly into his 4th point.
Okay.
Educating ourselves and future generations on how to live sustainably on a small planet.
Right.
So what's the state of education on that front?
Things have changed drastically.
Okay.
You won't find many old school textbooks and lectures anymore.
Right.
Instead, there's a much bigger emphasis on hands-on learning.
Interesting.
Kids today grow up understanding how ecosystems work.
Yeah.
And the ripple effects of our actions.
So they're not just learning about the environment, they're learning how to live in it.
Precisely think permaculture, renewable energy systems, managing resources in a closed loop.
Yeah.
Those are the skills you need to thrive in a world where resources are limited.
Right.
And it's not just for kids.
Okay.
There's been a huge surge in lifelong learning, community gardens, sharing skills for sustainable living citizen science projects.
So people are taking responsibility for their own education.
They are.
So in a way, Vonnegut's vision of a planet full of eco-savvy people is happening.
It is.
Though it took a few detours to get here.
Yeah.
What about his 5th point?
Let's hear it.
Stop thinking science can fix anything if you give it $1 trillion.
Right.
Boy, does that resonate today.
We've seen the rise and fall of so many tech solutions.
Oh, yeah.
Geoengineering, carbon capture, things
Yeah.
that promised to fix everything but ultimately fell short.
Right.
Science has been essential in dealing with climate change and resource depletion.
It has.
But we've learned the hard way that technology alone isn't enough.
Right.
There's no magic wand, no easy button.
Yeah.
It boils down to changing how we act, the systems we build, our whole relationship with the planet.
And that brings us to point 6,
Okay.
which might be the most uncomfortable one.
Yeah.
The idea that we can't just wreck this planet and skip off to a new one on a spaceship.
Right.
He calls that thinking mean and stupid.
It does sting, especially with all the talk about colonizing other planets.
Yeah.
But Vonnegut nails it.
Right.
There's a real arrogance in assuming we can trash one home and just find another.
Yeah.
He's reminding us we owe it to future generations to leave them a livable planet, not just a good luck you figure it out note.
It's a powerful reminder of our ethical obligations for sure.
It is.
So what about the final point?
Okay.
And so on, or kind of a cliffhanger, is it?
I think it's his way of acknowledging that the problems we face are too complex, too intertwined to fit on any list.
Right.
It's a challenge to think outside the box.
Uh-huh.
To be open to radical solutions, to understand this isn't a check the boxes and you're done situation.
Right.
And that, or else, well, that's Vonnegut reminding us what's at stake.
Right.
It's a call to action with some serious weight behind it.
We've come a long way in this deep dive, haven't we?
We have.
From unpacking Vonnegut's anxieties about the 20th century
to
analyzing how his surrender terms have played out in our present.
Yeah.
What stands out to you as we wrap up this part of the discussion?
You know what strikes me is how Vonnegut managed to capture the anxieties of his time. Anxieties that have, in many ways, become our reality.
Yeah.
He wasn't a fortune teller.
Right.
But his insights into human nature, our capacity for both creation and destruction, those are timeless.
It's true. He held up this mirror to society, showing us our flaws, but also suggesting a path forward, even if it was a challenging one.
It was.
We've seen how some of his predictions, like runaway population growth, didn't exactly unfold as he imagined.
Yeah.
But the core concerns he raised about our relationship with the planet, those are more relevant than ever.
And what's fascinating is that even though he was writing during the Cold War, a time when nuclear annihilation felt like a real possibility, he saw beyond that immediate threat to the more insidious long-term dangers of environmental collapse.
It's true.
He understood that those issues, while perhaps less dramatic, were no less existential.
Right. And he wasn't afraid to call out the flaws in relying solely on technology to fix everything.
No, he wasn't.
He challenged us to look deeper, to change our behaviors, our systems, not just throw money at problems and hope they disappear.
He also reminded us that we can't just abandon this planet if we mess it up badly enough.
Right.
That escaping to another world isn't a solution. It's a shirking of responsibility, a betrayal of future generations.
It's interesting because listening to Vonnegut's words today in 2088, it's hard not to feel a sense of both hope and unease.
I agree.
Hope, because we have made some progress, we've learned from some of our mistakes.
Right.
But unease, because those fundamental challenges he outlined, those haven't gone away.
And that, I think, is the enduring power of his letter.
Yeah.
It's not a prophecy, it's a conversation starter.
Right.
It forces us to ask ourselves, what kind of world do we want to live in?
Yeah.
What are we willing to sacrifice for a more sustainable future?
Right.
What legacy are we leaving for those who come after us?
These are questions that go way beyond the specifics of Vonnegut's time.
They do.
They're questions we all have to grapple with, regardless of what year it is.
Absolutely. And I think that brings us back to the very beginning of his letter.
Okay.
To those 3 pieces of advice he offered.
Okay.
The serenity prayer, the call to be true to oneself, and the reminder of a higher judgment.
It's almost like a framework for navigating the complexities of life on this planet.
Yeah.
A guide to facing challenges with both wisdom and courage.
And ultimately, I think that's the message Vonnegut was trying to convey.
Okay.
That the future isn't something that just happens to us.
Right.
It's something we create collectively through our choices, our actions, our commitment to building a better world.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Vonnegut's letter, we want to leave you with a question to ponder.
Okay.
If you could send a message in a bottle to the future, what would it say? What wisdom would you share? What warnings would you sound? What hopes would you express for the world to come?
Because in the end, we're all writing our own messages to the future, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah.
And perhaps by listening to the voices of the past
Right.
and engaging in these difficult conversations, we can find the inspiration and the guidance to make our messages ones worth reading.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those messages flowing. You never know who might find them or how they might shape the future.